and there was a person being eaten by a dog, but the dog was actually ripping the Achilles tendon and the calf muscle off this person who'd been killed in the tsunami, and that just sums up what it was like. It was just, thousands and thousands of people dead. There was no airborne service, police had gone, the fireys had all been killed. There was just nothing left. 5 kilometres from the coast, inland or thereabouts, was just wiped out. If this beam comes down, 5 or 6 of us, we're all gone. So it's pretty scary when you're working in probably 30 centimetre gap, trying to free someone, and you get a 5.5 aftershock. For the first time ever, I saw a fire crown backwards down a hill. Went from a grass fire into a pine forest. The flames must have been 50 metres high. 200 houses in about 2 hours burnt to the ground. Paper in America says fires are 15 times more susceptible to common cancers than the general public. I've just been diagnosed with cancer. 40 odd years with fire and rescue, going to hazmats and fires and off-gassing and all sorts of diesel particulate from trucks. All of a sudden I looked down, heard a noise, and all my gear had just all come out of the crack because the whole pillar had detached. The whole pillar had detached, and I thought I was going to go backwards with probably 80 or 100 tonne of rock. I don't think people on TV really get to see and feel just how bad these things are. I remember seeing a Labrador dog hanging out of a tree. Planes had been washed off the airport and were wrapped around trees along creek lines. So when people say I don't believe in climate change, it's not a religion. You don't believe in something. You either understand the science or you don't. People get crook, they go to the doctor, they rely on the science. They get in an aeroplane, they rely on the science. They drive a car, they rely on the science. But when it comes to climate change, they've got their head up their arse. So I don't really know why they don't want to delve in a little bit deeper. As I said, not about believing, it's about understanding.
G'day, welcome to episode 4 of Peak Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sanford. Today we're joined by Bruce Cameron. Bruce is a pretty impressive individual. He's got an extensive list of achievements. I was reading his resume before this, and it's pretty bloody long. He spent 42 years in Fire and Rescue New South Wales and recently retired as a superintendent. He's done some pretty cool stuff, including major operations like the Boxing Day tsunami, the Christchurch earthquake, Lismore floods, the mega fires we've had here in 2019, 2020. I'm hoping we can dive into hopefully some funny stories. I know he's got plenty of those, but he may not share them. And he's also got quite a lot of insight into what it's like to be a fiery and some of the more dark topics. It'd be good to touch on that with him and see how it's affected him. Bruce has been pretty pivotal in my life. Maybe 13 or 14, Bruce taught me how to ascend a rope with a Juma, which is crucial for climbing photography and many parts of climbing. And he also taught me how to trad climb. I think 16 we went down to Tasmania and he taught me how to climb in Freycinet there. Then he also taught me how to bolt and develop new routes. Looking forward to sharing some of the stories. He's a great bloke and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here.
Looking forward to it.
Having a yarn.
Could you please tell me about some of your closest calls while you were in Fire and Rescue?
Yeah, I had quite a few actually, both in the urban search and rescue field, earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that, and also a couple in bushfires. But I think some of the closest calls were during the earthquake in Christchurch or subsequent to the earthquake occurring. There's lots of aftershocks when we arrived, and rescuing one particular lady from a building. We kept getting multiple aftershocks, so it's pretty scary when you're working in probably 30 centimetre gap trying to free someone and you get a 5.5 aftershock or whatever it was at the time. So yeah, they're pretty scary moments. And in bushfires I've had situations where there's been wind changes and things develop very quickly. And particularly in that 2019-20 fire season, as everything was so dry, the fire predictability was Yeah, very, very hard to call. So we had a few close calls, one out near the Walgan Road that goes out from Lithgow to the Walgan Valley in particular, and the flames must have been, went from a grass fire into a pine forest. The flames must have been 50 metres high. So that was a little scary moment. But over the years you have day-to-day things, but certainly the situation in Christchurch and the bushfires in 2019-20 were some of the most memorable moments of my career. Yeah.
Do you have a particular moment with those bushfires that you can recall, like very vividly?
Yeah, quite a few. Actually, one here in the Blue Mountains, actually, when for the first time ever I saw a fire crown backwards down a hill. So it actually went backwards against the grain. Normally fires, come up a ridgeline and preheat the fuel as they go. But this actually burnt backwards, and it was incredible. I've never seen it before. Quite erratic fire behaviour. But yeah, just about every time went out, you'd see things that had never been experienced before. One day up Putty Road, saw the fire go across from one side of the road to the other in seconds. And again, the flame height must have been 30 metres high, and there was just nothing left, not a single leaf. So yeah, that fire season was certainly unprecedented. They kick that word around a fair bit, but I think with climate change, it's quite clear that we're getting more and more unprecedented events. So, yeah.
And with that crown, what happened weather-wise to allow it to go backwards?
Oh, it was just I think the fuel dryness. It was so dry. There was a little bit of a breeze coming from the west, but generally you might get the odd bit of fire going up into a tree, but this was the whole side of the ridge burning backwards, and I'd never seen that before. And it basically kept going down into a gully, then up the other side. So yeah, I've never seen it, and quite a few other people with decades of experience said the same thing. They'd never seen that type of activity. Yeah.
And so the worst of that season was in the north of the Blue Mountains, you'd say?
Yeah, generally it was a very small lightning strike that kicked it off, and it just kept on getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And in that period, I remember being here, and there's fire in the north, one in the west, and then one in the south. And we kind of got a little reprieve there. Could you talk me through what was going on?
Well, you had obviously the fire in the north and the Wallamai. Then you had a lightning strike at the Ruin Castle, the Ruin Castle fire, which is near the Three Sisters at Katoomba. And then there was another one at Green Wattle Creek, which is in the backwaters of Warragamba Dam. And basically the Blue Mountains was surrounded by fire in all areas. But the big thing is a misconception that the Blue Mountains was heavily impacted by those fires, and that's not the case. Around Mount Victoria and a little bit around Blackheath was, but really from Blackheath to Lapston on both sides of the highway, nothing burnt. So all the urban interface, so where housing meets the bush, is all untouched. So that's a bit of a worry because it hasn't burnt for a long time, and obviously with a large period of over the last few years of high rainfall, the bush is quite thick, and you only need a drying period. And basically from Blackheath to Blaxland or Lapston is all at risk.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a big area.
Yeah. Can you touch on your Christchurch earthquake experience? I know with that lady, can you tell me about the story behind how you found her?
A news crew actually heard someone singing out, and from Channel 9. So we shut everything off, all the equipment that we had operating, and we immediately could hear this voice of this lady called Anne, and she'd already been trapped for about 22 hours. From we got there in the middle of the night, we flew across on a C-130 RAF plane out of Richmond, and it was remarkable that she was still alive where she was, because the building had pancaked. Basically, she was caught in a little void in her office, and it was a really delicate and dangerous rescue to try and burrow in. We were working off the end of a New Zealand Fire Service aerial appliance, like a ladder truck, and every time there was an aftershock, there was bits of concrete coming down and glass major structural members of that building were moving. Sadly, there was a lot of deceased people around her. After we got her out for the next few days, we had to burrow into the building and removed deceased people and obviously return them back through the process through police and then disaster victim identification, but back to their loved ones. But there was about 20 people, I think, removed from the building, the Pine Gill building. Over the coming days, we handed the final handover to a British urban search and rescue team had flown in from Britain. And when I initially got the handover from the New Zealand fireys, they said there's still 20 people unaccounted for, and that's pretty close. That's what happened. By the time we'd finished that operation, 20 people had been removed. So they did get everyone, but obviously by the look of their injuries, it would have been pretty quick for most of them because they were under slabs of concrete and whole levels had collapsed down.
That's insane. Wow. The Boxing Day tsunami, that would have been quite...
The Boxing Day tsunami, where I went, was just off the coast of Banda Aceh. So that was an area in Indonesia, and it was around 9 on the Richter scale, so a massive earthquake uplifted the ocean and the tsunami hit. And it was probably 20 metres high in a very highly populated area. We went as part of a medical team, not as an urban search and rescue team. There was only 2 fireys. There was 2 SCAT paramedics, 2 doctors off the Care Flight helicopter, because back then New South Wales didn't really have an international medical cache. And fire rescue were asked to respond because we had a self-sustainability unit or capability. So we left all the rescue gear at home and took things like lighting, ration packs, stretchers and sleeping bags, basically the camp setup, or what we refer to as a base of operations, and took all that gear with us to support an Australian medical team that was sent there. It was really a surgical team to assist the Achinese people. So we flew to Jakarta in a RAF plane and then into Banda Aceh itself, which, as I said, was the epicenter really of the earthquake and the tsunami. So it wasn't only the tsunami that did the damage, it was already a lot of the buildings had been downed and compromised and people were trapped due to the earthquake, because it's a massive earthquake. So it was total devastation, loss of, it's 24 years coming up this year. 24 years, sorry, it was 2004, now 2024, so it's 20 years this year. And the pilot did a fairly low level, probably 500 metres over the inland coastal area. So we could see, people floating in rivers. We could see buildings on fire. It was just incredibly impacted. And when we landed, they weren't sure if the plane, it was the biggest plane, had landed since the earthquake. And they weren't even sure if the runway had cracks and things. So they did a few sweeps to check it out first. And then we went into town on top of a Unimog, looking for a hospital to work out of, and we found a maternity hospital just on the edge of Aceh. But it was quite confronting, like looking off the top of that Unimog. The head or the team leader of the task force pointed it out to me and said, have a look at that on the side of the road, and there was a person being eaten by a dog. Like the dog was actually ripping the Achilles tendon and the calf muscle off this person who'd been killed in the tsunami. And that just sums up what it was like. It was just, thousands and thousands of people dead and mass graves, people getting dumped out of the back of tip trucks, and bulldozers would put some earth over and then another load of body of trucks after truck with just bodies in them. It was pretty overwhelming in a way, but we were there to help. And it's not something that is ever nice, but that if you're helping someone, you're getting them back to some form of normality, if you can call that sort of thing normal. But because everything's wiped out, there was no ambulance service. Police had gone. The fires had all been killed. There was just nothing left. It was quite, for 5 kilometres from the coast inland or thereabouts, was just wiped out. So quite devastating.
Horrific. How long were you in that zone?
So about 2 weeks from the time we left to the time we got back, and we stopped over at Jakarta on the way back, and actually were able to have a shower in a hotel, and we set up portable, tarpaulins, things to catch rain, and with a shower on the end of it, just like a bush shower, so people could actually, the hygiene levels were reasonable, but it wasn't like a proper shower, and it wasn't hot water. The fireys that were there were keeping that base of operations running, but also we were in the operating theatres helping with getting people onto the operating table, because there was all the normal staff that operate in a hospital had been killed. There was no one left, so or very few people. So we did lots of tasks that fireys normally wouldn't do, but there was no one else to do it, so we all swung into action to help.
Far out. Horrific. What was your experience on the Lismore floods as well?
Yeah, I went up to Lismore twice. Again, that word unprecedented, people say, the media throw it around with go abandon, and it's always used. But the reason it's always used is because these events are unprecedented. And the first one was, it was massive. And then a few weeks later, they had another one almost as big as the first. So again, I don't think people on TV really get to see and feel just how bad these things are. I remember seeing a Labrador dog hanging out of a tree. So those people that lived at that house or wherever the dog had come from would never know what happened to that dog, but it was literally 20 metres thereabouts or 15 metres up a tree. And, planes had been washed off the airport and were wrapped around trees along creek lines. Yeah, really, really devastating to see. I mean, the teams worked well to try and recover property and clean things, wash out houses. There was a lot going on to try and, again, bring it back to normality. But the fact there was 2 events in a month or within 2 weeks, again, it is unprecedented. So no matter how much people want to argue, and there's a lot of climate, I don't really call them climate deniers. I think they're more people that don't understand science. If you sit on a barbecue, you burn your bum. That's how simple it is. And why people don't want to choose to understand the science. So when people say, I don't believe in climate change, it's not a religion. You don't believe in something. You either understand the science or you don't. I've seen it in fires. I've seen it in floods. I've been up to the northern rivers, I don't know how many times. I was in Queensland. I think it was Cyclone Debbie, or Tropical Cyclone Debbie. They just all, blend into one. But and of course, the reason why Queensland cops it so much is the heat and the moisture, and they haven't been ever getting, certainly in the last tens of thousands of years, events like we're getting now. And it's the frequency of these things is the issue. They just keep on rolling on. So it really is devastating to communities, to businesses, to individuals. And I think until we get the world in order, which I can't see happening, it's not going to get any better. You look at the forest fires, Northern America and Canada. I had a mate in Tasmania. He's the fire service. He was over there recently on an incident management team, and he just said they're huge. These fires are huge. And we've had them in Spain and Portugal. It's happening to the point that it certainly is unprecedented.
Yeah, and it's not until people are are directly impacted that they realize how big these things are. Like I know right now there's been all the hurricanes in the South States, and you just see a snippet of that on the news, and that sort of leaves your mind. Most people don't even realize how intense it is. And even with the 1920 fire, we had all that smoke in Sydney for months there. That was the first time those people had ever actually experienced anything.
Yeah.
And even then, it's not a big impact as opposed to, losing a house up here, which some of my mates did as well.
Oh, it's massive. Around the world, it's again, it's unpredictable. You look at Zermatt in the Swiss Alps, it copped it recently. Asia, there's just so many areas around the world that are getting, it's really interesting. I was about to say, and it's probably wrong, of me to call them natural disasters. They're really unnatural disasters because what we're creating is a set of circumstances that is unnatural. So people like to call them natural disasters, and I saw some commentary the other day that they're actually calling them unnatural disasters now because humans are undoubtedly a major cause of what we're experiencing. Yeah, droughts, floods, famines, it's all happening.
There's infinite science there that people are ignoring.
Yeah, the science is there. People get crook, they go to the doctor, they rely on the science. They get in an aeroplane, they rely on the science. They drive a car, they rely on the science. But when it comes to climate change, they've got their head up their arse. So I don't really know why they don't want to delve in a little bit deeper. As I said, not about believing, it's about understanding. As I said, if you ever come across one, tell them to sit on the barbecue after it's been on for 5 minutes and see what happens to their backside. And that's the science in action.
Yeah. Very intense topic that many people don't even want to comprehend.
Yeah, well, when I was with Fire and Rescue, they actually have a whole section there now called Natural Disasters and Humanitarian. So that's how Fire Rescue's evolving to deal with these things. They've actually got a full section now. They used to have the rescue section, the hazardous materials section, all these different sections, and they've actually got a dedicated section because there's so many disasters now and humanitarian crisis in the Asia Pacific, and there's what they call a classified heavy rescue team, the urban search and rescue team, and they just went to that Turkey earthquake, which was a natural geological event, of course, not so much anything to do with climate change, but that team, things like the Northern Rivers floods, the Queensland floods, bushfire, they're dealing with all the disasters that are occurring locally, on a state basis, nationally and internationally. And they're really busy because there's just so much going on.
So you had 42 years in the service and earned the AFSM, stands for Australian Fire Service Medal. Yep. Very impressive career there. What was your experience like when you first started in the fireys? Was it very different?
Yeah, it was very different. Like work health and safety in particular, it's one of the biggest things. It was really old-fashioned back then. The fire engines, the appliances as they're called, were quite old. So it was tough days, and a lot of the bosses were ex-World War II type guys who didn't put up with any nonsense, whereas now it's all warm and fluffy, I think to their detriment, to be honest, to the organisation's detriment. But yeah, it was a pretty tough room back then, and a good learning platform. But I certainly saw a lot change, particularly with things like thermal imaging cameras, trap persons locators that pick up seismic and acoustic tapping of people trapped under buildings in earthquakes, just the equipment, the uniforms, everything's really has advanced greatly throughout my career.
Yeah, I can imagine. What's some of the typical challenges you'd face throughout the job from day to day?
I think dealing with the public's quite challenging because people think you're some sort of, I know you're a public servant, but they want you to do things that are beyond your scope. And I'll give an example of a guy. He was we thought he was a bikie, and not the smartest guy. Western Sydney at Doonside took out the motor of his Harley Davidson in the lounge room, and he took it into the bathroom to wash all the parts in petrol in the bath. It's a housing commission house, so you can imagine what the kids' fumes and things they were breathing in. And so he washed all the motor. He was rebuilding the motor or put new pistons in it or something, and he, of course, when he did that, lit up a cigarette.
Oh, wow.
And the house blew up, basically, and was on fire, and his Harley was burnt to the ground. It was uninsured, and after the fire got put out, he basically, luckily the kids and the wife or the girlfriend and the guy got out, but he wanted me to basically arrange for a new house to be, or a new unit to be sourced. And I said we'd put him in contact with our chaplain. We had a chaplain, and obviously there's people you can reach out to for support, but he basically thought that the fire and rescue crew should almost find the house, find a new unit for him, and there wasn't much left in the house. But there's this expectation that sometime within the community is hard to deal with.
I know you've got a few funny stories from the job as well. Would you care to share some of those?
Oh, geez, most of them I think need to stay in a black box somewhere and not be told was there. But yeah, there was always the stuff that occurred from. I remember one guy we got called to when I was actually a fire, not an officer, to a beehive at a kindergarten, and this guy said, "I know bees." Another fire, and he went up with a cardboard box to try and scoop all the bees in, and he said they won't attack you, and he must lucky he didn't die because he just got attacked. The whole swarm of bees attacked him, and then he wanted to get back into the cabin, and of course he was covered in bees. So in the end, we sort of hosed him off to try and remove many bees as we could. But yeah, so there's stories like that they're just hilarious at the time, even though that could have been quite serious if you had a reaction to it. Yeah, lots of funny stories that you see as a fiery, and the old saying, you see people on their worst and best day, and it's some of it's really quite funny, and you just think how do people get themselves into these positions, and other stuff's really quite sad, particularly if they didn't cause the accident or weren't there was no contributing factor by them, but they finish up injured or worse. It's not good. But you do see some funny stuff.
Generally, bees, if they don't know you and they're not used to you, they will definitely not react well. But if they get used to your scent and understand, oh, that's my guy, the beekeeper.
Yeah, well, this guy just thought he was, but
big error.
Big error, yeah.
Damn.
Lots of funny things, but some of it's more challenging. Some of the things that you see with injuries and burn, people that have been burnt in house fires and things like that. That's very challenging. But so the funny stuff sort of balances it out a little bit, and you need that.
And I know a lot of fireys or people in emergency services, any sort of aspect, they're usually really lighthearted, and there's only one way you can deal with a lot of the stuff you're seeing. So if you don't laugh, you cry, kind of thing. How would you say the organization is with supporting you now versus?
It's changed. There's peer support groups and there's psychological support if you need it. Generally, most fires they just tend to talk amongst each other, and a lot of them have been in quite a while, so they understand. Not saying people aren't impacted. I think there's that there's post-traumatic stress injury or syndrome, but there's also and that's when it's prolonged and goes on, but there's post-traumatic stress might be just that it knocks you around for a few days when you see someone deceased or squashed, whatever it is. I remember a big pallet of timber came off the back of a truck as the guy was unloading it with a forklift while one guy was undoing the straps on the other side. He nudged it too hard and the whole pallet of timber came down, sling of timber, and squashed this guy. And it was quite horrible to see, but that's post-traumatic stress. After a few days, it tended to dissipate and disappear. But anyone that's not impacted by something like that's not human, but it's the poor people that suffer, and it's accumulative over, event after event or incident after incident. So I'm not saying for 1 minute I wasn't impacted locally. I was just lucky, I suppose, through getting out in the bush and going rock climbing. I paint pictures, landscapes, do a fair bit of writing, produced a couple of books and history and things on the Blue Mountains, which I think helped me get through those traumatic events, particularly big things like, Boxing Day tsunami or where there's tens of thousands of people who died, or Christchurch, which was quite confronting. So having an outlet helps those, I think, situation. Or for me, anyhow, I was able to cope with it by switching off and getting out in the bush and going to do a canyon or climbing, cross-country skiing. Just you need that fuse, I think. Otherwise, it's really tough to deal with if you don't have those mechanisms to soften the blow.
Sure. Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question, how you manage anxiety and stress. But I know that, the painting and the bush really helps ground us.
I think it's really good, and the people that I think do have outlets and avenues, particularly something that's creative, they seem to cope quite well. But, when you before, to tie in that other question about has it changed to get into fire rescue, I think too many people are joining for the wrong reasons. They're joining for just lifestyle because of the shift work. They're not interested in community serve. They're not interested in actually being a good operator. It's all about their Instagram account and look at me, rather than, doing the job. And I think it's really sad that fire rescue don't sort those people out before they get in. So there's a lot of people that have got no idea what they're in for. And it's probably fire rescue's fault. They say you go to a degree, you go to car accidents. You go to building collapse, you go to fires, but until you see the child in the child seat with their head cracked open and dead, or the kids are alive and the parents are dead, or people that are, you got to look at it in context about how it's not just going to a car, it's how it impacts you and how it impacts others. And I think fire rescue need to do a fair bit more work around who they actually recruit. If you have a look at special forces, SAS and commandos, they have a really low PTSD type figure, because I think they know what they're in for. They know what they sign up to do, and they're well drilled, well trained. Whereas a lot of the junior fireys I see these days are in it for the wrong reasons, and I think that's not good, because all of a sudden one day you're going to turn up to an incident that is very confronting, and if you're not mentally prepared for what that's going to be, it can take its toll. Like, I've just been diagnosed with cancer of the prostate, stage 2 cancer, probably 40 odd years with fire and rescue, going to hazmats and fires and off-gassing and all sorts of diesel particulate from trucks. And that's another downside, which they don't really, I think it's 7 times, 5 or 7 is a paper in America that says 15 times more susceptible to colon cancers than the general public. So, these people that want to put their stuff on Instagram and Facebook or whatever they do these days and say, look at me, need to look at what's actually involved psychologically, physically, the possible injuries that can occur. As I said, I've had a few real close calls in my time. In New Zealand, I thought I was going to finish up brown bread with this big aftershock, and thought if this beam comes down, we're all, there's about 5 or 6 of us, we're all gone. And that's the type of mindset I think you need to have, is that it's not about do or die, but it can be a dangerous job. And then with all these cancers, I've got so many mates who are fireys now that are battling all different, from lung cancer to prostate cancer to, bowel cancer. It's just incredible. And many have died. One of the reasons I retired early, well, not early, I retired right on my birthday because I could, was probably 6 months before that, we lowered this mate of mine who was a fire, blacked down into the ground, and the family around the grave weeping and crying. And I just went, this is not good. So when I hit my superannuation maturity age, I thought, this is it, I'm gone. I was going to do another year, so I'd only been promoted to to a senior role in fire rescue the year before. But after seeing my old mate Nev get lowered into the ground, that was the clincher for me. So I think, it is a good job, and things get, the PPE, personal protective clothing, and the way they manage carcinogens and clean and dirty air, all a lot better than it was. There's still a lot of improvement they need to do, or the government needs to give the money to fire rescue because their budget's limited, and they can only do what they're given. But it is getting better, but there's a lot more I think they can do to improve health, safety and welfare of firefighters, that's for sure.
I'm really sorry to hear that about Nev. I know a lot of people, especially fires is a little different in the process, but with paramedics and cops, they go and do their degree for 3 years before they even see what it's like on the job. And it'd be cool if there was like a program where you could, obviously you don't want to go straight to a car accident, but that's what you're going to deal with on you every week pretty much. And like these people do 3 years before they realize, oh, I'm not cut out for this. Like, there's no way I can do this. Which is quite crazy. I think there should be some sort of way people can get a feel for whether they'd be up for that job.
The other thing that fire rescue don't do, which say special forces do, is claustrophobic tests, height tests, swimming tests, hemophobia. There's people that collapse. I've seen them in first aid. I used to look after emergency life support. The delivery of that within fire rescue was one of the portfolios I had. And, people would pass out looking at mutilaged wounds in a first aid course. So what are they going to do when someone's caught, their arms are caught in a printing press, or, there's a car accident where a car's ploughed into a power pole at 100 kilometres an hour. If they're passing out in a room doing first aid or emergency life support training, I don't think they're the right person for the job. It's not about being hard or tough. It's just being able to process it and knowing that you're there to help and people expect you to help. So I think it comes down to, as I said, the recruitment side of things, making sure people make a decision based on the type of work that they have to carry out. You're always going to get someone who's impacted by things, and that's totally understandable. But and we all need a break. As I said, I had mechanisms and things in place to try and deal with it. But some people sign up to the emergency services and aren't suited. They're just not suited.
Purely the roster's really good and I can do all this in my days off.
It can be terrible. Some of the things you have to see and do and deal with, as I said, are really traumatic. And I got traumatized by that, call it post-traumatic stress for a couple of days or a week, and then luckily I could move on. But there's some people that can't, and the others, a lot of them did for years, and there was this go through the whole emergency service career, and then one day there's this one job that sends them over the edge, and I totally get that because it could happen to anyone, but that's a cumulative exposure to serious incidents. But I'm talking about people need to know before they join up what sort of work and how horrible it can be. It can be very rewarding too. It can be getting a kid's finger out of a plug hole after he's been poking the soap in the plug hole and his finger gets caught. There's no blood, a few tears. Maybe you cut the finger out and the kid gets his soft toy, and everyone's happy. So there's some really good sides to rescue and fire related work, but it's also something that people shouldn't enter into lightly because it can really present some horrible situations. Yeah. But some of them are very rewarding as well.
For sure. I think it's those mindsets that it correlates to the mountains as well. Like you can't have a partner that just cracks under pressure. I know, like when I've been in the mountains and someone's got injured, you have people that are useless with helping you deal with that, and they just freeze or that same thing. They kind of can't look at it. Whereas you need to just be pragmatic and just get into it. And I guess a lot of you do see a lot of people that come from those sort of scenarios that do join fire service later on because they have got those foundations there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're the sort of people I believe they should be attracting, not some of the people that they take on. Yeah, some of them are really good. Most of them are good, but there's too many that I've seen that slip through the cracks and shouldn't, just because they've passed an entrance exam. They do a physical aptitude test as well, but I think there's too many people that, and then when they get there, they don't want to come to work. They're on the sick list all the time, not through mental injury. I'm talking about being dodgy. Yeah. They want Friday afternoon off because they want to watch the football that night and have a few beers or whatever it is. I think you've got to have people that are prepared to come to work. That's a bit of a bonus.
Across the board, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Even from my limited experience in the mountains, like the Alps, you often see change rapidly. Like even New Zealand, winters were finishing earlier and I'd get summer conditions in spring for my climbing. And that was within 4 or 5 years. I was noticing that was happening quick. Lots more rockfall, but like with the fires, how evident has that been in your career?
You tend to get as I said, rapid periods of growth due to a lot of rain. So everything, rather than having just a nice, almost like corrugated iron, smooth peaks and troughs, it's literally up. It's either we've got 45-degree days with 10% humidity, and really bad fire conditions, or 2 weeks later you've got 200 mils of rain falling in a couple of days. So you're getting these really sharp, rapid onset events of hot, drying, low humidity and wind after we've had massive bursts of growth. And the other thing is the bush comes back when it's burnt because of that turbocharged sort of environment, that the bush regrows really thick. And if you have a look out along some of the ridges and even on the urban interface from that 2013 bushfire we had in the Blue Mountains, you can't walk through the bush now. So, within 10 years, a bush always used to grow back, but it's just everything seems to be turbocharged now. And that's the same with the floods. We've always had floods. There's no doubt about it. But, I grew up in the lower Blue Mountains, and some of the creeks and gorges have had massive, I'm talking blocks the size of combi vans, washed down and forming big jumbles of boulders in the gorges and creeks, which has never happened in my lifetime. So that's physical evidence that the environment is changing. And I certainly haven't seen, I've been going down there for 50 years, and in the last few years, it has changed dramatically. Like the side of the creeks and gorges are getting scoured out. So it's physical evidence that it's changing. The heat in the fires, when you look at the northern Blue Mountains, all those, the trees, the canopy, those trees, as it boils the sap, it's just too hot and the trees can't regenerate. The lignotubers come up underneath the trees and they re-sprout epicormic shoots and things, but the actual tree, the timber dies off because it's just wildfire and crown fire. So everything's basically, as I said, it's had a turbo boost. One of those days in 2019, it was, I think, 48 degrees at Richmond, about 6% relative humidity and 50 to 60 kilometre-hour winds, which is apocalyptic. It really is. I've still got a screenshot of it from the BOM website on my phone in case people were ever querying, but I've actually got that on my phone because I thought, wow, you never used to see that. When you said climate change in relation to emergency services, it's changing the way we do business. And they frame it up into prevention, preparedness, response and recovery, so PPRR. And the biggest bang for buck is obviously in the first two with your prevention and preparedness, and that's where they can make great inroads. This is only so much budget to go around, and then your response and the recovery is really when it's too late, because you have actually had to respond. So governments are going to have to pour a lot more money into preparedness and prevention. Otherwise, we're really, really going to be going down the gurgler in the future. It's an absolute no-brainer what's happening. You mentioned about climbing in New Zealand. When I used to go over to the Southern Alps and around Mount Cook, the Tasman Lake used to be the Tasman Glacier. There's not much of it left anymore. And where they're doing boat trips now in ribs, rubber hull inflatable boats, I've walked down the middle of that glacier, which is now a lake, and you can see the terminal face that just keeps falling off into the lake. So, you look at the creeks, you look at the vegetation, you look at the fire damage, you look at the floods, you look at the glaciers, and people still will, as I said, not so much deny it, still don't understand the science behind it. And the physical evidence is there. If you were a detective gathering information, you'd have a pretty strong case for the court. Yeah, it is. It's certainly, it's happening. It really is happening. And it's going to prevent people living a normal life in the future. There's no doubt about it. I think, and it's only just begun, really, and the predictions where we are now in 2024, I think were what we're seeing now. Years ago, they said wouldn't occur till about 2040, but we're already there. Already there. But I think governments around the world do a pretty poor job of it. It's all about making money. It's that capitalist type thing. And I really can't see, sadly, until there's a change of heart from right around the world. I can't see it being wound back because it's happening. You turn the news on or jump online, there's disaster after disaster. And I know social media is instant now, and the connectivity around the world is there, which probably you had to wait 2 weeks in a newspaper to read years ago. But it just highlights how many events are occurring on a daily basis, both nationally and internationally. So look at that thing out at Broken Hill. That storm blew all the high voltage power stanchions over, and they've got no power. I mean, that's what happens to communities when climate change hits. We've always had storms, but again, look at the severity, look at the frequency of these events, and it's all turbocharged. It's it's not getting any better, that's for sure.
Yeah, there was one thing you mentioned that prompted me, the 2013 fire. I remember at school, I was on the basketball court that afternoon, and it just felt eerie, like that was before we knew anything was happening. And that, it was so hot and dry and the winds were crazy. And then we ended up getting locked in the hall at school until the Hawkesbury Road had opened again. I don't know, maybe, do you remember how many houses were lost out?
Absolutely, I was there. There was around 200 houses in 2 hours. And again, these rapid onset events, we never used to have them. We used to have a lightning strike in the gross, and it would trickle around and play, to burn for a couple of days, and people would be ready and prepared. And as you know, that 2013 fire in the lower mountains was a power line that fell down, hit the scrub. Scrub was bone dry, and off it went. And 200 houses in about 2 hours burnt to the ground. It was just one. When you looked at it from the air, I flew over it actually in the helicopter, and about a day afterwards, and you could just see this big long skid mark of fire. It was a wind-driven fire from the point of origin all the way to the Nepean River. It didn't really even go to the north or the south. It was just driven, and any house or any car in the way basically was, in the firing line. So again, that type of fire is what's going to catch people with their undies around their ankles in the future, for want of a better term. Is there's going to be, a campfire or a down power line or something, and all of a sudden you're going to have multiple properties under threat in a really quick time. And that's just, I think, where we're heading in the future because of these conditions that present largely due to climate. Not every fire is going to be put down to the woes of climate change, but it's certainly part of the big picture that we're getting more and more dry conditions, hot winds, and the result, again, is loss of property, loss of life, loss of economy when it impacts business and tourism. During those Blue Mountain fires in 2019, how many tourists do you think didn't attend the Blue Mountains? People aren't going to go and stay in hotels and motels and go out to dinner when they've got a ring of fire around them. So it has external bearing effect on other things.
For sure. I don't know if you remember the stats. I think it was close to 500 million animals were lost in the. I don't think they quite could work that out, but it was huge.
When you look at all, from insects to koala bears, but it was a lot.
Yeah, it's horrific. Yeah, that's how quick it happened. I remember sending mum and dad a text. I was like, "Oh, I'm alive," if you're wondering. And they're like, "What do you mean? What's going on?" Like, they had no clue. This fire's burnt 200 houses in Wimley. Well,
in 2 hours, yeah. Near the golf course, I think Linksview, it started, and then finished down. I think in the end that night went down onto Yellow Rock and the Nepean River. So yeah, they move really quickly and do a lot of damage along the way.
Absolutely, yeah, full on. The bush here is like made to burn in a way, but not to the extent it has been. Like, obviously you get the smoke cracks open the seeds and they drop, and that's a great thing, but the fires have been too hot for that to happen. I know we went out into the Blue Breaks just after that fire had occurred, Greenwater Creek, and it was all weed. There was nothing but weed there, and that came back in full force, and none of the natives had come back, which is, brutal to see. And it was all the sticky farmers' friends that would get all over you and pretty annoying. But but I know in Canada when they have their fires, like, that doesn't grow back at all.
Yeah, because it's pine. Yeah.
I was getting a burn my first time there, and I was like, "Oh, when were these fires?" And they're like, "Oh, decades ago." and it looked like it had just happened.
Yes, yeah.
Any loss of, their vegetation there's really brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, we'll go to a lighter note, which is somewhat related. Some of your books that you've written and published, could you tell me about them and what sort of inspired you?
Yeah, I've done written and researched 3 books on the Blue Mountains, mainly just out of interest, and also I think the story needed to be told.
Yeah.
It's not as though I'm trying to highlight or attract tourism. It was more really to let both locals and visitors, if they really wanted to seek out those areas that they have the history, the Aboriginal history and also the European history to those wild areas. And I think it's really important to guard against inappropriate development in the future and people wanting to encroach on national parks and our native natural areas. So it was really putting something historical down to try and secure those areas and embrace just how wonderful they are. So yeah, those books were all a labour of love, but I learned a lot myself, and hopefully people that read them also get an appreciation of the bush and what's out there, and the fact that people had been roaming around those hills for thousands and thousands of years, I think is important to communicate. Obviously the local and people anywhere, it's that the actual stories is up to Aboriginal people to tell, but I think it's also good to acknowledge that people did roam around these hills and live in these hills sustainably for tens of thousands of years. So I think that's really important. That's one of the drivers as well.
Very cool, yeah. And you wrote on a region that's probably less walked than most in the Blueies, the Blue Labyrinth.
It's not as well known as, say, up around Katoomba and the more tourist areas, all that area south of the mountains, villages into the national park and down towards the backwaters of Warragamba Dam. So yeah, it's a area that isn't as spectacular as far as lookouts and cliffs, but it is really spectacular when you get into the gorges and the creeks. There's even canyons. There's a couple of little canyons, like properly defined canyons. Magnificent Aboriginal artwork and Aboriginal sites. Some fantastic areas of forest, like blue gum forest and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful area that, in a way, is not fully known to people, which is a good thing in a way because it's helps protect it.
Absolutely. Which is something I mentioned recently to someone I was showing around the mountains. Not that we have to go into complaining too much, but there's a book recently that's shared all the beautiful spots that we had. And these places you used to go to and it would just be the two of you or just you and your mates are now like, there's rubbish and beer bottles and 20 people there.
I think that was wholly and solely a money-making
it really sucks.
vision, where mine was really to help protect the environment and get the Aboriginal and European history out there. And in no way I didn't have map references or guides or anything like that. It was wholly and solely designed to let people be immersed into the bush and have their own adventure. And I think that's the difference between that book you're talking about and what I did.
On the Blue Labyrinth, that, like you said, that area is so dense and can be quite tough to move through. But as you're saying, it's quite a scary zone for the fires if there was.
There's only really 1 or 2 fire trails in there, and if you get a fire, it just ridge skips across because there's nothing to stop it. Even the fire trails won't stop it. I mean, you can give vehicular access for fire tankers and things, but generally it's a dissected plateau with really dry ridgetop vegetation, and once you get a bit of a wind behind it, it's heading towards the mountain townships pretty quick. And that's happened before where we've had fires there. But again, with the way the climate's going, I don't think it's going to get any better once you get a lightning strike or a fire caused by a misadventure on the wrong day. It will certainly bear down on the mid-mountain and lower mountain towns pretty quickly.
With those Woodford bushfires that you were part of, I distinctly remember I was in the CBD in Sydney. The rest of my family was away. I think my parents were over in WA, and luckily the dogs were being looked after elsewhere, but my sister called me and she's like, there's a fire in Woodford, you got to get there right now. And I was merging across 4 lanes of traffic in Darling Harbour trying to get to the exit for the west. Yeah, she was like, can you grab my uni textbooks? And I was like, absolutely fucking not. I think I hung up on her and I was like, just text me. I was like, text me what you need. But I was thinking passports, photos, maybe some like precious jewelry or something, but absolutely not going to focus on getting your textbooks. But yeah, once the car was packed, raced over to Dan's to help him with the fire because that was much closer to his house. I was coming up the valley there and we only had garden hoses and had, tried to wet everything down and keep the embers away. But as that started coming much closer, we were like, holy shit, this is much bigger than anything we can deal with, way out of our scope with this little shitty low pressure garden hose. So we left, and as we left, your crews all arrived, and I remember they were so professional and chill, and they just walked on in and got it done. And then, put the fire out just in the backyard there so it didn't get to the house. It wasn't too bad in the end because the wind died off, but it was moving quick at the start.
That often works both ways. That sometimes can be the driving force that actually causes all the problems. But then if you get a change that goes the other way, it can blow it away from properties. But then the flank of the fire can become the head, which is an issue as well. So it's all about, as I said, that predictive fire behaviour and knowing what, if there's a southerly coming through, what impact that'll make.
For sure. On that topic, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people get this wrong, the difference between a hazard reduction and a backburn. Could you tell me about that?
All the time.
Always.
Happens all the time. You hear old Doris outside the shop saying, there needs to be more backburning. We need more backburning. They don't do enough backburning. Well, backburning is a strategic fire lit to contain an existing wildfire. It's a strategy put in place to burn off a fire trail or a river or a hand trail that's been put through. It's a firefighting technique where a hazard reduction or a prescribed burn is a planned fire to reduce fuel that has to meet a prescription. So the prescription is the flame height will be 2 meters, or it will be, we'll light it at the top. It's got where the ignition points will be. It's all very well planned and thought out. Whereas a backburn is no different to, in the same terms of firefighting, is using a hose to put out the fire front. But you know straight away when people start rabbiting on about there's not enough backburning. They're just using that term because they don't know any different, but it certainly shows they don't understand. They're not exactly up to date with the latest techniques in fire mitigation. So
in summary, backburn is a defensive tactic for a fire that's already there, and a hazard reduction is a planned burn that has
to reduce fuels and meets a prescription.
Cool. Thank you. Hopefully people remember that one.
Yeah. There's a lot of experts out there that really, there was that one, I think
Bloody Greens.
Yeah, after 2013, old ladies ringing up saying that they, and I think Donald Trump, God love him, said the same thing of the fires in America, that they should have prisoners out there raking up the leaves to stop bushfires. So you could imagine the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area with people, let alone the damage to habitat and everything else. But so you just know these people have got no idea and they're better off keeping their mouth shut. But trying to, rake leaves around Canangra walls, you'd need a couple 100 meters of rope and you'd be there forevermore. But they just don't understand. And it's people it's the armchair critics that have got no idea that usually are the most vocal.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are always blaming politicians and parties, but we'll move on from fires. Can you tell me when you started climbing?
I started climbing when I was about 12, climbing and canyoning and things like that. There was, back in the day, there was no such thing as sport climbing. There's no such thing as glue-in bolts or rings. Shoes, the climbing shoes or boots were not very sticky. The rubber was very sticky. I wouldn't call it primitive, but it was very raw. Some people were still using pittons or a mix of pittons and passive climbing protection. So I started in about 1976, 77, around that sort of mid-70s. I think the hardest climb in Australia at the time was grade 24. So when you were back then, like in my teens, I was probably climbing, 22, 23. When the hardest climb was 24, you were climbing okay. If you could climb 18, 19, 20, which I was, particularly on gear, like no sport climbing, it was, not saying I was never really that good at it, but certainly the grades aren't anything like they are now. But it was a completely different new routes were ground up. You put a rack of gear over your shoulder and tied on and said, let's do this, and up you went. Weren't aware of what was above you. You just kept on climbing, and it was real adventure-based climbing. Obviously, things have changed a bit now, but it was very different back then to what it is. Guys like Keith Bell and Ray Lassman standing under Bluff Mountain and doing, I think it's close to 330 metres, 1,200 feet of climbing up the beautiful climb called Flight of the Phoenix. And they just literally said, we'll start climbing here. That's the line we're going to follow. And that's the way it was done. So, yeah, it was good times, and glad that I was part of that. Learned to climb in that era, because I think it was a lot more pure, probably more dangerous in a way, because you didn't have glue-in bolts and you were abseiling off a sling around a piece of rock or a little sapling, things. It was all very much a natural environment that you're in. The odd bolt would be put in for like a belay or something, but that was usually done on a sky hook, with a hand drill.
Yeah, can you explain that little skyhook? For people, it's just a little...
Well, it's just a little metal beak, like a bird beak, and you just put it onto your harness with a sling.
Yeah.
And you might be like 20 metres above your last piece of gear with a twist drill that you'd hit with a hammer. And then you'd have to that's where the Blue Mountains carrot was born.
Yeah.
It'd be a 3/8 machine bolt that had been ground down on a grinder to look like a carrot shaped, and then you'd bang it into the hole with your other hand, put a little bracket on it and a carabiner, and off you go. But they were always scary moments hanging off a skyhook, putting in a bolt. But I didn't put many in my early days, really, because it was too hard to do that. And if that skyhook popped off, you'd take a massive fall generally.
Yeah, which I'm sure it did a few times in the Blueies, with the rock we've got.
Absolutely.
Especially putting such a small surface area through a hold or edge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it was a different era. And as I said, a lot more pure and a lot more adventurous than it is now. The climbing today, with the way people, the things that people climb and how strong they are, and climbing gyms of, people used to go bouldering and keep fit, but the whole climbing world has changed.
You actually taught me to trad climb down in Freycinet there, which was a pretty cool experience for me. I vividly remember the possum in the car eating the bananas as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of adventure. You need adventure like that.
Absolutely.
Need adventure. And even abseiling off some gear down to the waterline, and starting a climb at where the waves are breaking over the rocks, and it's a real adventurous stuff, without discounting the modern day climbers and how technically good they are and how strong they are. I still think some of that adventurous stuff that's still out there, people are missing the intrinsic value of climbing by not experiencing that. It's all about the grade and not the adventure, and not the position that you're in.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend about that recently. Like, there's a lot of ego behind climbing now, and instead of asking someone like, what's your favorite type of climbing or place to go climbing, it's how hard do you climb?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I'm going to judge you off that.
Yeah.
Not like, do you enjoy it, and what drives you to go to these places? The exploration side is definitely something we've always had interest in. I remember Tom and Tom was climbing, and they wanted him to compete in the climbing gym, and Tom was like, no, I want to go do trad. And we were going out doing trad, and we were shunned because we weren't sport climbing, and that's such a weird, bizarre concept. Like, who cares? I feel like the adventure's always been more interesting to me, and that's why places like Pierce's Pass appeal a lot more, because you get such full value. Big wall, good climbing, and it's a good time.
Yeah, I think those sort of, on-site new routes, even at PCO, I did a big one there with Will Moon years ago called Colours of Spring, which is this lovely sort of line and crack that goes up through a big roof. And, we just got to the bottom of it and said, this looks good, and off you go. So there's no abseil preparation. There's no putting in bolts beforehand. I think that adventure is, and it's graded 21 or something, but not hard, and only one little section. Most of it's about 17 or 18, but it's the adventure and the unknown when you're climbing those sort of things that make it worthwhile. And that's what I always sought out. And same in Tasmania, did a lot of climbing in Tassie on Ben Lomond and places like that. Just ground up first ascents. Were always really what drove me to continue climbing. Yeah. And I still, to this day, would rather climb and put gear in than I would clip bolts. I don't know, it's just probably where you've cut your teeth and where you've come from. So certainly not climbing anywhere near as hard as you probably could by getting on something that's bolted. But it's just so different.
I always find it impressive seeing people from your generation like jump on a crack, and you might not have climbed for a very long time, and you'll just fly up it smooth. It's just like a total skill. Whereas a lot of the climbing these days, if you're not climbing all the time, you get pretty depressed pretty quick because you're not able to keep up. You get pumped, you fall off, and you're annoyed at yourself. Whereas like a lot of that crack climbing is a skill, much like ice climbing. It's not as much about, well, depending on how hard you go. It's more of a skill, which is just cool to see. And I remember Adam hadn't climbed for ages, and he was like walking up this WI6 in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow. And then, same thing. You guys just retain it because it just stays there.
It's muscle memory, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
And very impressive. But I think the mentality behind that is also very impressive of Adam. Like, it's one thing to climb a 6 if you're strong and you feel good, but just to walk up a 6, no matter what, is pretty impressive mindset as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I know I take a few days to want to do that at least. So on that note, who were some of your mentors throughout?
Certainly Bob McMahon in Tasmania. Poor old Bob's dead now. He was one of the developers, or the main developer of Ben Lomond and a lot of the other cliffs, certainly in northern Tasmania. Absolute character. Incredible guy. Learned a lot from him about adventure, politics. He probably was the bugger that got me interested in drinking good quality red wine around the campfire, because he always took a good bottle in wherever we went. But just a real mentor and a real visionary in so many ways, not only in climbing. Harry Luxford, Harry's still alive. He's just about to turn 90. He was climbing until he was 80, did a first ascent on his 80th birthday. And he sort of, his vision was just to enjoy climbing. Don't worry about the grade. Like he'd say a really good quality grade 15. It's heaps better than a horrible grade 21. It's not about the grade. And he was all about the position you're in, and just climbing with your friends and the environment you're in, and going back to the campsite and having a glass of wine. Don't take yourself too seriously. So his mentorship was really about just enjoying climbing for what it is. And it's not all about, he was a really big believer, I suppose, in the quality of the climb, not the grade of the climb. As he said, things, like say Hocus Pocus at Mount Piddington. It's a beautiful climb. It's a great thing. And some of those other climbs at Piddington, probably some of the best climbs in Australia at their grade. So I learned a lot from Harry. On the more desperate side of things, John Fantini. Did a few things with him in the Alps in New Zealand. Abseiled off a snow bollard once off the Silberhorn Ridge of Tasman, backed up with this shonky ice screw. And these American guys were coming down after us, and they used it, but he actually took the ice screw out, and which was a silly thing to do, and just went off the bollard so he could score the ice screw. Yeah, but when we got back to Plateau Hut, Fantini walked up to him and basically was going to grab him around the neck to get and I've still got it, the ice screw. He said, give it back to my mate. He left it there as a donation. How dare you? It would have been covered up with snow and ice and left on the mountain sort of thing. But the fact that this guy had risked his life to knock that off was just bizarre. So I learned a bit from Fantine, climbed a fair bit with him in Tasmania as well, and new routes down in the Wollondilly. Just a machine, absolute machine. And I suppose the drive and the vision of Fantini was something that, I didn't climb with him a lot, but certainly, an amazing character. He's still climbing. And Keith Bell, he's another guy who I really admire and I've done a fair bit of climbing with. Share a love of the Warrumbungles. Obviously, Keith's done, just about owns the routes on Bluff Mountain. But guys like Fantini and Bell and those guys of that era are in another world. They're just, I could rattle off half a dozen of them or dozens of them, but of that sort of ilk. Hard guys, but really, they probably haven't climbed. I mean, Fantini was incredibly strong, but I don't think they climb for numbers. They climb for the transcendence of place and space. And, they could, to this day, climb the pants off most sport climbers if you get them on something like Bluff Mountain in the Warrumbungle, which is a big hunk of rock. It's third of a kilometre high. So I've got a lot from that sort of era, those guys. But the most impressive and important mentor was Bob McMahon. I reckon Rob McMahon from Tassie. He's just such a character.
Do you want to tell me some of his political stories that you might have mentioned? Would you want to touch on that?
His protection of wilderness and things like that. And he was against the pulp mill, the massive deforestation project that was going to occur to supply that pulp mill. And I wouldn't surprise me if that's what cost his effort probably cost him his life. I reckon it was just such a big campaign that he mounted. He manned others, but he was the driving force, and his wife Susie. So, a really big character, really massive character, and he'd put his money where his mouth is. And so I learnt a lot from him about integrity and if you say you're going to do something, do it, not just talk about it. A lot of politicians should and could take a leaf out of McMahon's. Well, I think the politicians hated him because he called them out. I learned a lot from Bob, and had some great times around the campfire, drinking wine and climbing.
Can you tell me, have you had any close calls with death in climbing as well? Have you had any pretty hairy moments?
I had a few. Climbing to Brigands Ridge on Mount Cook. Block came, with a melt, this fairly big as a loaf of bread, came whizzing past my head and just hit the helmet. I had an old Joe Brown fiberglass helmet and actually caved it in. It nearly knocked me off. Luckily, I had both my ice stools in pretty firmly. Yeah. And so that was it had to hit me in the face. I would have been gone, but it hit me in the head. And I actually got back. We were staying with a guy called Nick Craddock, who's a guide in Mount Cook. And I remember taking a photo. I've got the slide somewhere of the helmet that had been caved in, and he said, "You're a really lucky guy." And I was only in my early 20s there, but had that been 6 inch, 100 mil to one side towards my face more and not hit the side of a helmet, I would have been probably knocked out or knocked off. So that was a pretty close call. And another one that was really quite scary was that must have been early 80s, I'd imagine, from memory, climbing a Bombo quarry at Kiama. And there was this sort of grade 1920 finger crack layback thing. And I was almost at the top of this pillar. And it was quite a big pillar. It would have been like 2 meters by 2 meters stuck to the main parent cliff. And as I got to the top and lay backing with my hands and feet, all of a sudden I looked down, heard a noise, and all my gear had just all come out of the crack because the whole pillar had detached. Oh. The whole pillar had detached. And I thought I was going to go backwards with probably, I reckon, 80 or 100 ton of rock. I would have been, and Will Moon was belaying me. And I just remember all the gear just fell out and it was just all zippered down the rope. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, if I go up one more move, it's going to create more leverage. But on the top of the pillar was a flat section where I thought where you normally belay. Yeah. So I sort of downclimbed, and as I downclimbed a bit, I don't know how, I thought I'm going to fall here, and it was all jagged rocks and stuff down below. It would have been horrible. And it was probably only 12 metres, maybe 15 metres. It wasn't 30 or 40 metres, but it was a big column of diorite. As I started to climb back down, the crack had widened, and I was able to get my hands in it. Before it was like, you get your fingers and your knuckles in it. So it had actually detached from the pillar enough that I could actually, so I went from laybacking to sort of reverse jamming. And back in those days, I could jam okay. And Will had realised what had gone on, and sort of, there was no point him belaying me. So he'd moved to one side in case this thing came down. And I was really, really lucky that I knew how to jam pretty well. And I was literally almost jogging backwards, jamming. And as I got down lower, less force was getting put on the pillar. And there might have been a few little layback moves down the bottom just to stop myself falling off. But it was really, so I thought I was dead. I thought I was gone. And we left a note at the bottom of it because we thought we can't tie a rope to it and pull it over or anything, because we had to climb up the climb again. So we actually went back to the car and left a note and built a can there and said, do not climb loose pillar, because whoever went up the next time, I'm sure the thing's being pulled down now. And I noticed recently the quarry on the other side of Bombo, they've got a plan of management in there, and they want to develop an area for climbing. So yeah, which is quite interesting. But back in those days, it was on the seaside section of Bombo Quarry. But so they're probably the two main. Well, I did take a big fall off giant at a Dogface once, and I wasn't wearing a helmet, and I head-butted a piton on the way down and caved my head in, had quite a serious fall, bit of gear zippered, and so I pulled up. I reckon I fell. I reckon it would have been like a 10 metre fall, and it just goes to show that had I worn a helmet, I would have been a lot better. But luckily the gear above that held. And another close call was on Ginsberg and Bluff Mountain. I took a fall seconding the rope. The ledge gave away, and basically I swung, and because I swung, there was no gear between myself and Frank Moon, who was belaying me, and I took this fairly nasty fall, probably 15 metres maybe or more, and I didn't know whether I was going to stop or not, but that was pretty scary. I was up about 800 feet, and taking a fall at that height, at that distance, was pretty scary. But so like in any career or sport, if you stick at it long enough, you usually get something that puts the wind up you. But they're probably the three main ones that readily come to mind about that were fairly close calls. But again, I think it's good management. If I had a helmet on, I could have managed the risk a bit better had I looked at that pillar closely rather than just gone up and climb it. As for the alpine stuff with the rocks coming down, you can't do much about hurtling rocks on Mount Cook. But it's I think I haven't had too many major injuries, a few little scrapes and bumps, but I still come back to the hills. I'm still out there doing it when I get a chance. So yeah.
Have you had any significant injuries from any of your work or climbing?
No, I'm very lucky. Oh, apart from cancer, which is probably a work-related thing. After so many years, so hopefully I'm dealing with it. It's early days with this diagnosis, but so that's something that's more than likely arisen through work, I would say. A few, again, structures coming down and landing on me, but lucky always identify a safe zone. So if something does happen, you've got a bit of room to wriggle. So it's all about having a good level of situational awareness, both in the mountains. I think climbing, rock climbing, mountaineering, rescues, firefighting, it's about just making sure you're aware of what's going on. I think that's really important. It's to date been one of the things that I think that has kept me out of a box is just being aware of what's going on. It's really important. And having plan B, always have plan B, I think is really important.
Actually, a random fact I learnt on awareness of your surroundings. I was reading that often, because we're always reading left to right, if you scan a room right to left, you'll retain much more information of what you've seen. I remember trying it, and it works for sure. But that's generally in a scenario of like safety perspective, whether you've got like a confrontation, if you're in like a fight, or probably more relevant to people in special ops and military. Not that I ever condone fighting or would suggest you do it. Going to jail's stupid. Hurting people's even worse. If you can, definitely run. Doesn't matter how big you are. There's definitely no pride in getting stabbed or injured for life. But yeah, anyway, weird segue.
Yeah, it's the way your brain works. Yeah.
So I know you've researched quite a lot of the early pioneer climbers, particularly in Australia, and interviewed them. Could you tell me about some of that?
Yeah, I had a real interest in telling the story. Like in America and England, you had stories and yarns of people like Joe Brown, people, the really famous British rock climbers, Yvonne Chouinard and guys like that in Royal Robbins in America. So the story really hadn't been told about a lot of the Australian pioneer climbers. So I set about tracking them down because they were still alive and getting their stories and getting their history. So I was then contacted by the Australian climbing magazine Rock at the time, and they were really keen to run these series. Probably I did one a year over 5, 6, 7 years, the various people. And it was, even though there was a lot of commonality, there was a lot of really good individual stories as well. So I think it's an important part of Australian climbing history to record the characters that were part of that. And people like Russell Kippax, Kevin Westron, Harry Luxford was one of them as well. Dave Roots. These are real pioneers in the Australian climbing. Those sort of people were the ones who were the forefront, particularly in the Blue Mountains. There was others in Tasmania and Victoria, of course, and up in Queensland. But I think it was really important to the people that I'd met, and I had actually climbed with a few of them. Obviously, Dave Roots I hadn't, but I had with Russell Kippax and, of course, with Harry and some of the others that I'd done those articles on and recorded the history. And we're actually, I'm assisting Ian Brown, a local guy, ex-National Parks ranger, putting together a book on John Eubank, who developed the climbing grade, the scale, the Eubank system. So sadly, John took his own life in, about 2013, I think. Very sad. So we're doing a book at the moment. I'm sort of the assistant editor, which has been a good project. So Ian's done a terrific job on putting that together. So I don't know when that'll be out, but it'll be a really good historical insight, very entertaining, some great old stories and some fantastic images. He actually left me his whole photo collection. So I've got all the slides scanned, and some of those images have never seen the light of day. So some terrific photos and slides from the Eubank collection. And I think it'll be a great thing for Australian climbers to read about how it was done and how climbing emerged and evolved in Australia. Because what that guy did is, in a short period, I think he gave up when he was like 24, started when he was 13 or 14, but didn't arrive in Australia until he was 15. So what he did in under 10 years, the amount of new climbs, and from Frenchman's Cap to the Warrumbungles to the Dogface to just, it was incredible. His climbing career was incredible. And luckily, I feel like lucky I did a new route with John and Frank Moon and the Gross on-site route. And that was his last ever route. So I'd actually climbed, I don't know, is his last ever new route? I'm not sure if he had done a few climbs after that, but certainly not many. But it was out of doubt his last ever new route. So it was kind of a special moment having known John. He used to stay with us a fair bit when he came out to do that route. It was, I never knew at the time that in a few years after we did that climb that he'd be dead. But a really sad ending to a colourful life. Yeah, a real character. That's probably one of the missed moments in my climbing career. I should have got Bob McMahon and you back around the one campfire, swapping yarns. It would have been brilliant. That would have been a good podcast to record. I remember him walking. We're up in the Fingal Valley and walking up to go to this new cliff and spied a few new routes to do. And Bob was just in front of me, and he literally, I thought he'd been exploded, like forced up in the air off a explosive mat or something, but he actually went sideways. And as he was gone sideways, there's this massive tiger snake that's got its mouth open, and it's actually lunged at him. And he'd been bitten by a tiger snake, I think, up in Benaloman, and still had the big scar on his leg. But with a pack full of gear, he actually, there's like on as mini tramps, people jump on it. It looked like he jumped off the mini tramp, but he was just walking along this creek when this tiger snake, it must, I don't know, it would have been 4 or 5 foot long and big fat thing. And it actually launched at him, but I don't know how he got out of the way of it, because it would have, got him if he didn't take the evasive action that he did. So
I know Brad, your son, they were walking the Cowmung River and they saw 41 snakes in 3 days or something like that. And Brad had the misfortune twice of, he had a snake that swam after him, chased him in the water, and then another one, I think they were mainly browns and blacks and red bellies and browns. And then maybe a tiger snake as well. I think he tripped while one was chasing him, and they thought it was going to get him, but he got out of it.
I remember you saying at night they were hearing frogs croaking on the edge of the Cowmung, and next minute you hear this crunch and the frog would stop croaking. And he said that was like within about 10 or 15 feet of where they were bivvying that night on the edge of the river. So I think with that many snakes, I would have liked in a fly tent or something.
For sure. I was thinking about that recently. I slept out in the gross with nothing, and it was a beautiful night. But I know people have been bitten. Actually, there's a friend, Lex. She had a king brown biter in her sleeping bag.
Wow.
She's fine now, but yeah, had a bit of a process to recover from that.
Yeah. Well, to talk about Tasmania, I was only down there fairly recently, and I was camping with my mate Neil Smith up at Benaloman, and it was a cold, misty night, and I'd walk back. I had my tent pitched, a one-man tent, and I'd only got out of the tent probably 10 minutes before, and I'd got my sleeping bag and everything out, and then we were walking back to have dinner. It was about 5:30 at night. And then I did zip the tent up, but I went back to get a beanie because it was getting cold, and I couldn't work out what this black stick was right in front of the tent, and it was a massive tiger snake.
Ugh.
Massive tiger. So had I left that zip undone and then jumped into the tent and zipped it up, and that thing was underneath my sleeping bag or mat, I would have been in this cell trying to fight off a big, and it was a big tiger snake. And I thought about moving the tent, and I thought, well, what's the point? It's wriggled off. It can't get into me. But there's a lesson there for all of us, I think, that zip your tent up, because it's good habitat. It's no different to a snake bag, really. It's an enclosed.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Snake catcher.
Keeps them warm.
And the fact that it was cold, I was in a duvet. It was a really cold evening, but of course they're alpine tiger snakes up there, and it was literally at my tent door. It's only a small little one-man tent, but it would have easily accommodated a 5 foot long.
Absolutely. So yeah, they don't take up much room.
Certainly a message there. That's for sure.
Nasty. Yeah, there's plenty of those stories. My friend Dom was in South America, and he had one in his sleeping bag, and he didn't know what it was, but he'd been tagged. And he just laid there for a day, which is the old way of dealing with things. Yeah. Just see if you wake up. And he was okay. Wasn't too venomous. But yeah, pretty nasty. So I do like sleeping out there without a tent, but sometimes you wonder if it's worth it. We'll dive back into Jantini as well. Like, can you tell me some of his stories, some of the stuff he did? Because I know a lot of people don't actually know who he is and what he's done.
Fantini is an amazing character. Alpine climber. He's done lots in the Alps. The Drew, that's like all those things, Gildamiti, all the big stuff around. He's climbed in South America. He's climbed in, Cerro Torre, and so those sort of areas. Just an amazing. He's super fit. I think he's just turned 80, so he's no spring chicken, but incredibly fit. an amazing drive as a climber and just as a person generally. Held that Katoomba to 3 peaks, Guagoon, Cloudmaker, Paralyzer, out there in the Southern Blue Mountains. He held that record for years. Just incredible. He's a machine.
Yeah.
Did a fair bit of climbing with him in Tassie and also some routes in the Wallandilly. And just to sum him up, I said, we were going to the Wallandilly. I had these new routes that I wanted to do. And I said, oh, John, I think we should call it off. It's going to be really hot. Like it's 35 or 36 degrees. And he just didn't buy into that. He thought, what's your problem? So yeah, shut up. And we're going, I want to do these routes. So we had a camping spot by the Wallandilly River. Yeah. And up we went really early in the morning to beat the heat. And it was incredibly hot even at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we did this really great finger crack up this big shield of rock that was about grade 21 on site. He led the hard pitch, I led the easier pitch. But I got to the bottom, and after that we abseiled off. And I was hot and tight, like it was really hard going. I was obviously only reasonably, I would have been maybe early 20s then, maybe early to mid 20s. Yeah. I thought, oh, you beauty, we'll go down to the river and have a swim and that's it. But he just looked at me and went, swim, we're here to climb. So by this time it was probably 36 degrees, and then we did this other really nice new route. And then I thought, well, that's it. Surely now, like it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no, still time for another route. And to the point where the rock was that hot to touch that your fingers were almost getting blistered. Yeah. I was feeling crook. I drunk all the water. I think I took 2 litres of water, but I'd smashed those down. It was so hot. But no, he wanted to do. So we did 3 routes there all on site in one day. Yeah. And it was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and obviously daylight savings in summer. So we still had time to get down, and he sort of said, oh, well, we've done 3 now. He said it might be a bit much to push for a 4th route, new route. So we went back down to the camp, and we had a swim, but I was just shagged and wasted, and he was just, champing at the bit to try and, we'd only gone down there for the Saturday and Sunday, and I'm thinking I'm glad we didn't make it Monday as well, because even though I was pretty fit back in those days, to walk up there and do another 3 routes the following day. But that just sums up what he was like, or he's like. He's just a powerhouse. He's really driven, and good guy to climb with as far as having vision and drive.
He was climbing high 20s to almost to this day, right? Marcus. Oh, yeah. I'd heard like 28 in his 70s or something like.
Certainly climb 24, 25 like it looked like grade 14. It's just incredible character.
Is he Australian as well? Or?
Yeah, his mother's Italian, I think. But I think we're pretty sure he's born in Australia. But he, again, like many of us back in those days, all came from bushwalking backgrounds. So you understood the outdoors and you were happy to camp. And that was like a progression from doing lots of mountain trips in like walking and back then those sort of long trips into the Southern Blue Mountains and even the Northern Blue Mountains into some of that wilder country, and that sort of led into climbing and then into mountaineering. And so Fantini's certainly one of those guys that came from an outdoors background before he got into climbing. Really strong base. And he actually did the first ascent of Firebug with John Eubank at Mount Boyce.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great climb. I got him to recount the first ascent for the Eubank book on the first ascent of Firebug. Doesn't look for notoriety or fame. He just, again, likes to get out in the hills and climb, and really good road cyclist as well, super fit. Yeah, really interesting character, very dry, but really driven.
For the audience, any random fact you have that might make a little impact on someone's life?
You've got to love what you're doing. Try to love where you live. Obviously love your family or partners and kids. I've obviously got a son and a daughter, but also I love the bush. I love the mountains. I love wild areas, coast, wilderness. So I think love, if you're strategic and actually live by that, love who you are and what you do, that's really important as well, because people that wake up every morning and go, I've got to go to that job and to the warehouse and pack boxes. I just feel so sorry. There's always, jobs that people don't like doing, even as part of an overall job. But I think if you can have work and exist along the lines of loving what you do, even though it might be hard work, I think that's really important. And having strategy. It's like governments and bosses often talk about strategy but never really deliver. It's more all BS. They'll talk about it short term, but they don't deliver. And I think personally, whether it's writing a book, whether it's standing under that 70-meter rock climb and doing it, like when I got into the fireys, I wanted to have a job that was both indoor and outdoors, gave me time off when other people were working, so I could get into the bush and stuff when there weren't as many people around. So I think having a strategy is really, in life generally, is important, and whether it's a value or it's just something that I like doing, but make sure you've got some things in life that you love doing, because it's really important, because there's only one go, there's no dress rehearsal. So I think they're sort of two kind of life lessons that I go by, and it's really important. It's not about, in my view, I've got a house and I've got a car, but I'm not into material things and money. I'd rather have adventure and life experience and good health, that type of thing. Whereas a lot of people think they're successful by being some hotshot real estate agent or selling Ferraris. But to me, in my life, like if I'd rescue, and I have rescued people from burning buildings or a car accident or earthquake, and you can hand them back to their loved ones, it's far better than selling 5 Ferraris a week. They can have that. As long as I've got enough money to live by. Certainly I don't think money as a sign of happiness will cut it really long term for anyone. And you see a lot of people in corporate roles, by the time they're 35, want to get out and start up a company that is a green energy company or something for humanity, or go and work for Medicine Sans Frontiers. There's more to life than just making dollars, and I think that's really important as well. Really, really important as the main driver. That's probably why the world's so sick at the moment, because it is all about money and the 3 things: people, politics, and power, I used to say when I was in management roles and things, that they're the 3 hardest things to deal with in life. I think people, politics, and power. It's really one of the things that we all struggle with at times, and certainly something that I've always found challenging. So I haven't got the answers to everything, but I certainly would say, try to love what you're doing. Get out and appreciate areas that you love being in, and just make sure you're strategic about life in general. I think that's really important. And once you've got that strategy, even though you might have plan B, plan C, you try to stick to it. If it's a good plan, stick to it.
Yep. Yeah, I'd say connections to people and places, and that really will make your life better as well. And greed's the one thing that pretty much ruins everything, unfortunately.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. That's
So if you can get out of that rat race.
If you have a look at what's going on around the world now, with all the conflicts and horrible things that are occurring, it's people, politics, and power yet again. And profit, probably. You put another P in there.
Plenty of dodgy deals going on.
At the expense of people's lives. It's terrible.
Probably a slightly more positive question. If you could pick anyone from any era to share a meal with, who would it be?
I think having a dinner and a glass of wine with Yvon Chouinard. Amazing climber, amazing character, but he started Patagonia, and he's a real environmental guru as far as, again, he's got strategy, he's got vision, and I'd really like that historical side of what he did with his climbing, but also as a person, and his business focus, again, even though it's a very successful business person, hasn't been wholly and solely on profit. It's been on what's good for the environment. So, I reckon a couple of cold beers and A campfire with Yvon Chouinard would be really, and to hear about the Patagonia story as well, his business. I've read a few books that he's done.
Because he started Black Diamond as well.
Yeah, Black Diamond. Yeah, went from Chouinard to Black Diamond and now Patagonia. So he's like a worldwide leader in sustainable products and great vision, and is a true leader. So I think his leadership, his climbing history, just his business. There's so many things that'd be really interesting to have. There's plenty of Australian people I think that'd be good to have a chat to as well. But I think he's an absolute standout, Chouinard. Yeah, so
it's good, very good answer.
Yeah, a couple of beers with Yvon.
Pretty cool dude.
I might even get a free jacket if I sat by the campfire with him.
Yeah, maybe. I think he's sold out of Patagonia now, but he left it in good hands. If money were no object, how would you have lived your life differently, do you think? Or
not really.
Yeah.
No, I've got a pretty good property where I am. It's a nice setting in the bush. It's an extinct volcanic diatreme or volcano where I live. So it's a little mini blue gum forest and cabbage gums. It's just beautiful. So I think I wouldn't do things too differently. I enjoyed my career, a few little ups and downs and things you'd probably change. But if I had money, if I had more money, I'd probably donate a lot of it, I think, or put it into projects like the buying up land to save the conservation conservancy sort of stuff. Because I think that's important, because once it's gone forever. And it's something that governments need to do more of, I think, is look at saving what little is left. But if I had endless amounts of money, apart from helping people in need and buying land and things like that, I reckon I'd book a 2 or 3 months a year in the Kimberley.
Cool.
With a 4-wheel drive and head up. I've only been there the once. It was a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was fascinating. It's quite expensive to get there. And everything over there is expensive, but what a place. So if I wanted to do something personal, apart from giving away the tens of millions I had in the bank account, I reckon I'd spend a winter every year or every couple of years in the Kimberley. It's just the Aboriginal art and just the big skies at night, and the landscape is incredible. The waterholes and the waterfalls, and Kimberley is like nothing on earth I've seen. I've been, like with work, I've been to Mongolia and I've been to Asia and I've been to the Middle East, I've been all around, and I don't think I've ever been moved by country like I have in the Kimberley. It's just overpowering. It's just the colour, the power of the geology. You can stare at the geology and just see movement in it almost. It's a pretty special place. It's harsh and it's hard, but I kind of like that because it puts you in your box.
Humbling.
It's very humbling. Yeah, it's very humbling. I think that's good when mankind is humbled by nature is a good thing.
Absolutely.
So I really think, if I had the opportunity and the money next week, I'd be off to the Kimberley. It's a great place.
Wicked. What a great answer.
Yeah, fantastic there.
A real humanitarian. Well, thank you for your time, Bruce. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks for that. It's always good to sit in the Blue Mountains and have a yarn. So thanks again, mate.
A great yarn. Thank you, Brucey.
Cool.
Cheers.
I hope there's not too much cabbage in there.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Here's the part where I ask all that cringy shit that no one wants to hear. But if you could do the whole like, share, subscribe, comment, send it to a mate, that'd go a long way. PayPal me $1 million if you want, just so I can bring you some more episodes much faster. That would be really appreciated. Thank you.